Case 1. Brittney J. Dwyer. In August 2016, 19-year-old Brittney J. Dwyer from Adelaide, Australia, seemed like a typical rebellious teenager, covered in tattoos, piercings, and showing a defiant streak. However, beneath this exterior, there was something far darker. A cold-blooded killer willing to murder her 81-year-old grandfather, Robert Bob Whitwell, a retired war veteran, to claim his fortune. Bob lived alone in his modest home in the Craigmore suburb of Adelaide. A private and gentle man, Bob trusted Brittney despite her troubled past involving the law and drug issues. Little did he know she had been plotting his death for weeks. Brittney learned that Bob had over $230,000 in cash hidden at a safe at his home. But her motives weren't driven by a need for necessities. She wanted the money to fund a lavish lifestyle, including drugs, shopping, and a new car. She wasn't alone in her plans. Her accomplice, Bernadette Burns, played an active role, with the two exchanging text messages and voice memos detailing the crime. Brittney even sent a message saying, "I'm going to do it. I have to. I need the money." Weeks before the murder, Brittney and Bernadette drove 20 hours from Queensland to Adelaide with knives and a plan. But when they arrived, Bob welcomed them warmly with tea and showed Brittney family photos. She hesitated and left, unable to follow through. However, their plan wasn't over. On August 5th, Brittney returned to Bob's home alone. She told him she just wanted to visit, and after spending some time together, she followed him into the hallway. There, she stabbed him 7 times in the neck and chest with a large knife. As Bob lay bleeding, he reportedly said, "I can't believe you did this." Brittney then attempted to open the safe but couldn't. Panicked, she cleaned the knife, changed her clothes, and left. She texted Bernadette, "It's done. He didn't deserve it." A few days later, Bob's body was discovered by a family member. There were no signs of forced entry or anything stolen. At first, investigators had no leads, but after reviewing CCTV footage, phone pings, and text messages between Brittney and Bernadette, the full extent of their plan was uncovered. They had even discussed how they would act at Bob's funeral to avoid suspicion. When confronted by the police, Brittney confessed, saying, "I didn't want to do it, but I needed the money." Her confession shocked the nation. A granddaughter had murdered the man who raised her over a safe she couldn't even open. In 2017, Brittney was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. Bernadette Burns received a 13-year sentence for her role in planning and encouraging the murder. As of 2024, Brittney, now in her late 20s, remains incarcerated at Adelaide Women's Prison. She has reportedly undergone therapy and expressed remorse during private interviews. Her eligibility for parole begins in 2036. What makes Brittney's case so chilling is the level of premeditation involved. This wasn't the spur-of-the-moment crime. It was a carefully calculated betrayal, planned over months with text messages and long drives across the country. Bob had welcomed his granddaughter into his home, trusting her, only to be murdered by the very person he loved most. Case 2. Jennifer Mee was just an ordinary teenager in St. Petersburg, Florida, until a peculiar condition took over her life: constant hiccups.
Hi, how are you? I'm good. I get really bad chest pain, abdominal pains, throat pains, back pains. It's unbelievable.
What started as a minor annoyance soon escalated into something far more baffling. Jennifer began hiccuping more than 50 times per minute, continuously for weeks. Doctors were unable to explain the cause, and her unusual condition quickly captured national media attention, featuring on NBC, Good Morning America, and The Today Show. She became known as the girl who couldn't stop hiccuping. Some doctors thought it could be Tourette's syndrome, while others speculated stress or even a nervous system malfunction. Regardless of the reason, Jennifer's case drew significant public interest. However, behind the media frenzy, Jennifer's personal life was unraveling. Her family was torn apart, and her relationship with her mother became strained. As she entered her late teens, she ran away from home multiple times, drifted between different households, and started associating with an older crowd. By the time she was 18, her hiccups disappeared, but a darker side of her emerged. Her social media presence took a disturbing turn, with cryptic updates, gang signs, and photos with people much older than her. Jennifer began dating Lamont Newton, a man over 10 years older than her, who was linked to petty crime. Jennifer's behavior and identity changed dramatically. The sweet, innocent girl once seen on morning TV was no longer recognizable. Things took a tragic turn one night when Shannon Griffin, a 22-year-old Walmart employee, responded to a Craigslist ad. The post was vague but promised sex, which prompted Griffin to drive to a nearby house around 10:30 p.m. Unbeknownst to him, he was walking into a trap. Inside, Jennifer, Lamont, and their friend Lauren Rafford were waiting. Jennifer lured Griffin in, flirted with him, and led him into an abandoned home. Moments later, Lamont and Lauren ambushed him. They pulled a gun, demanded money, and attempted to rob him. When Shannon resisted, a violent struggle ensued, culminating in 3 gunshots. Shannon Griffin collapsed in the dark, bleeding and dying. Within 24 hours, the police arrested Jennifer, Lamont, and Lauren. The shock wasn't just the murder, it was who was involved. The media repeated the headline, "Hiccup Girl charged with murder." The girl who had captured the nation's attention with her bizarre medical condition was now accused of being the bait in a calculated murder plot. Legally, things got complicated. Although Jennifer didn't pull the trigger or fire the gun, Florida's felony murder rule held that anyone involved in a felony where a death occurs can be charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors didn't need to prove Jennifer killed Griffin. They only needed to show that she lured him to the scene, knowing a robbery was set to take place. And that's exactly what they proved. During her interrogation, Jennifer appeared confused, emotional, and at times distant. She initially denied any knowledge of the murder, but later confessed, saying, "I didn't know they were going to kill him, but I set everything up. I brought him there." This admission sealed her fate. Her defense team argued that Jennifer had a low IQ, poor mental health, and was easily manipulated, but the jury wasn't convinced. In 2013, Jennifer Mee was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lamont and Lauren also received life sentences. Jennifer's family was devastated by the verdict, but Jennifer remained emotionless, staring ahead quietly. The girl who once couldn't stop hiccuping had nothing left to say. She is currently serving her sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. In interviews conducted from prison, Jennifer has claimed she was manipulated and didn't think anyone would get hurt. However, Shannon Griffin's family continues to mourn the loss of a young man who believed he was meeting a girl, but instead became a victim of a senseless crime. Despite petitions for an appeal, Jennifer's conviction remains unchanged. She remains locked up for life, and the story of her transformation from the girl who couldn't stop hiccuping to a convicted murderer serves as a chilling reminder of how drastically a life can change.
Case 3. Isabella Guzman. She gained widespread attention after a haunting viral video showed her sitting in court with an unsettling smirk, void of any remorse. While millions of people viewed the clip, the horrifying truth behind it remained unknown to most. Isabella wasn't simply a defiant teenager, she was a killer. What she did to her mother was so brutal and shocking that even seasoned investigators were left deeply disturbed. The events began one evening at 9:30 p.m. when neighbors heard a woman scream echoing from a suburban home, followed by a chilling silence. When police arrived, they found blood dripping from the ceiling. In the bathroom upstairs, the lifeless body of 47-year-old Yun Mi-hoi was discovered, stabbed 79 times. Her daughter, Isabella Guzman, had ended her life in a vicious attack. Leading up to that night, the tension in the Guzman household had been building for months. Isabella had always been difficult, angry, withdrawn, and rebellious, but recently her behavior had taken a violent turn. She fought with her stepfather and had made threats against her mother. Just days before the murder, Yun Mi-hoi had sought help from the police, telling them that Isabella had threatened her life, saying, "You will pay." The police issued a warning, but it wasn't enough. On August 28, 2013, Isabella waited for her mother to enter the bathroom. Without warning, she attacked. Armed with a kitchen knife, she repeatedly stabbed her mother in the face, neck, and torso. Blood splattered across the walls, ceiling, mirror, and floor. Isabella didn't hesitate. Once the attack was finished, she calmly changed her clothes, left the house, and vanished. The following day, police found her hiding in a nearby garage, barefoot, eerily calm, and silent. When asked why she had committed the crime, she offered no explanation. It was as though her very soul had left her. During her trial, a chilling detail captivated the public: her unsettling smirk. The footage of her in court went viral. Who was this girl? Doctors testified that Isabella was not just angry, but was suffering from schizophrenia, hearing voices, and believing her mother was evil. In her deluded state, she thought she was saving the world by killing her. The court didn't see her as a cold-blooded killer. They recognized her as mentally ill. Isabella was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to the Colorado Mental Health Institute in Pueblo. She has remained there since. In 2020, Isabella made headlines again with an interview in which she said, "I wasn't myself when I did that. I wasn't in my right mind." She expressed a desire for release, claiming she had improved, but the public remained unconvinced, haunted by the memory of her cold smile and the brutal act she committed 79 times. Despite the horror of her actions, Isabella became a controversial figure online, with some even romanticizing her story. A TikTok trend emerged featuring fan edits and the hashtag #FreeIsabella. Yet behind the viral fame was a shattered family and a life ruined by untreated mental illness. Isabella Guzman was not a cold-blooded killer in the conventional sense. She was a ticking time bomb, and no one intervened in time. Her mother paid the ultimate price for that neglect.
Case 4. MacKenzie Shirilla. It began like many modern love stories, a teenage infatuation fueled by late-night texts, fast cars, and the rush of youth. But for MacKenzie Shirilla, it ended in what prosecutors would later describe as a deadly mission. At just 17, MacKenzie was the epitome of an all-American girl. Pretty, popular, a cheerleader from a quiet suburb in Strongsville, Ohio. But beneath her flawless Instagram photos and makeup lay something darker, something obsessive, possessive, and ultimately lethal. Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, was 20, charming, street smart, and the kind of guy parents warned their daughters about. They partied, fought, and made up, but there was always an underlying threat. MacKenzie allegedly told Dominic, "If you ever leave me, I'll kill us both." Dominic didn't take her words seriously, but it wasn't long before it was too late. On July 31, 2022, at 5:30 a.m., a surveillance camera captured MacKenzie driving a car down Progress Drive at an alarming speed. Dominic sat in the passenger seat, and another friend, Davian Flanagan, just 19, sat in the back. The car never slowed, never swerved, and never tapped the brakes. It flew off the road and crashed headfirst into a warehouse. The aftermath was devastating. Dominic and Davian died instantly, while MacKenzie survived. When first responders found her, she was unconscious but alive. She claimed to remember nothing, but the car's onboard data told a different story. 100 miles per hour, no braking, gas pedal pressed to the floor. In court, prosecutors made it clear MacKenzie had turned her car into a weapon. This wasn't an accident. It was a cold-blooded execution. The motive? A toxic, obsessive relationship that spiraled into violence. MacKenzie had fought with Dominic just before the crash, her jealousy and rage boiling over. In her fit of anger, she acted on her chilling promise. "If I can't have you, no one can." In August 2023, MacKenzie was convicted of murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. At just 19, she became one of Ohio's youngest women ever sentenced for double homicide. The families of Dominic and Davian were left broken, their future stolen in an instant. MacKenzie's life, once filled with carefree moments, was now marked by prison jumpsuits and solitary confinement, a life destroyed by a single hateful act. Her case captured national attention, serving as a tragic reminder of how unchecked, unstable, and toxic teenage love can lead to unimaginable consequences. Case 5. In January 2016, the small college town of Blacksburg, Virginia, home to Virginia Tech, was a place where students balanced their dreams and challenges. But behind the doors of an off-campus apartment, 19-year-old Natalie Keepers was plotting a horrifying crime. Though she wasn't a killer in the traditional sense, Natalie became an accomplice in one of the most chilling child murders in Virginia's history. The victim, 13-year-old Nicole Madison Lovell, had been through more in her brief life than most adults. A cancer survivor and liver transplant recipient, Nicole struggled with her self-esteem, was frequently bullied at school, and spent much of her time on social media trying to reinvent herself. It was through her online presence that she met 18-year-old Virginia Tech freshman David Eisenhower. Nicole thought she had found a boyfriend, but she was unknowingly being manipulated by him and his accomplice, Natalie, into a deadly plan. Natalie, an honors student studying aerospace engineering, came from a stable background with no criminal history. However, she harbored a fascination with morbidity, keeping journals filled with violent fantasies. When David confided in Natalie about Nicole potentially exposing their secret, instead of recoiling, Natalie became infatuated with him. Together, they devised a plan to kill Nicole. David lured her out of her home under the pretense of meeting him and stabbed her in the woods. The murder was cold and calculated. Afterward, he and Natalie disposed of her body, driving across state lines to North Carolina. They scrubbed the car, destroyed Nicole's phone, and went back to their daily lives as if nothing had happened. Nicole's family reported her missing, and a massive search began. Within 72 hours, digital evidence pointed directly to David. He was arrested, and soon after, Natalie's involvement was revealed. She initially denied any involvement, but as investigators pressed further, she admitted everything and even led them to Nicole's body. During David's trial in 2018, he tried to shift the blame to Natalie, claiming she was the mastermind. However, the evidence, including messages, plans, and Natalie's testimony, made it clear that he was lying. David was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and concealing a body, receiving a 50-year sentence. Natalie, charged with accessory to murder and conspiracy, tried to claim she was manipulated by David and that she was mentally ill. However, her own words revealed her true involvement. She wanted to experience it. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Nicole Lovell was just 13 years old. She had fought cancer, loved pandas, and dreamed of a bright future. But that future was stolen by two disturbed individuals. David Eisenhower will serve his sentence until he's in his 60s, and Natalie Keepers will spend decades in prison with the possibility of parole when she's in her 50s. Nicole's family continues to mourn, advocating for online safety and raising awareness about the dangers of grooming and peer accomplice violence.
Case 6. Michelle Carter. In a quiet town, a young man was discovered dead in his truck behind a Kmart. At first, it seemed like a suicide, but as the investigation continued, it became clear that the situation was much more complex. It was a tragic end, but it also revealed a legal nightmare involving manipulation, digital coercion, and fatal influence. At the center of it all was Michelle Carter, a 17-year-old girl with blonde hair, braces, and a phone full of disturbing messages that were anything but innocent. Conrad Roy III, an 18-year-old, was a quiet, intelligent, athletic, and hard-working young man who had struggled with anxiety and depression for years. He had previously attempted suicide, keeping a journal where he expressed his inner turmoil. Despite being described by those around him as sensitive, bright, and capable, Conrad struggled with feelings of low self-worth. He met Michelle in 2012 while visiting relatives in Florida, and their relationship largely existed through text messages and phone calls. Over time, their bond grew, but so did the darkness. Michelle Carter, living in Plainville, Massachusetts, was a high-achieving student, sweet and well-liked. However, she suffered from an eating disorder, took medication for depression, and often felt invisible. Behind her phone screen, though, she was a different person. She craved attention and meaning, and she began to associate these needs with Conrad's death. Conrad confided in Michelle about his suicidal thoughts, sharing various methods he considered, such as carbon monoxide poisoning, overdoses, and hanging. At first, Michelle tried to talk him out of it, but soon something changed. She began to encourage him, pushing him to go through with it. She told him, "You keep putting it off, but you never do it. You just have to do it. You just have to do it. All you have to do is turn on the generator. When Conrad hesitated and stepped out of the truck, Michelle allegedly urged him to get back in, and he did. Tragically, he died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Over a year later, the text messages were uncovered, sparking public outrage. Michelle was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. The case wasn't simple. There was no weapon, no physical presence, only words, texts, and phone calls. Could words alone be enough for a conviction? Michelle's defense argued that Conrad had struggled with suicidal thoughts long before he met Michelle and had attempted suicide multiple times. They also cited Michelle's own mental health struggles. However, the prosecution painted a different picture, one of a girl who wanted to be seen as the grieving girlfriend, gaining sympathy and popularity. After Conrad's death, Michelle texted her friends admitting, "His death is my fault. I could have stopped him." She waived her right to a jury trial, and in June 2017, the judge found her guilty of involuntary manslaughter, stating that her act of encouraging him to return to the truck ultimately caused his death. Michelle was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, with 15 months to be served behind bars and the remainder suspended with probation. She began her sentence in February 2019 and was released early in January 2020 for good behavior. The case raised critical questions. Can someone be held criminally responsible for encouraging suicide through text messages? Where does free speech end and criminal behavior begin? How do mental health, medication, and teenage psychology factor into these situations? Some viewed Michelle as a manipulative killer, while others saw her as a troubled teenager who made an irreversible mistake. Regardless, the case set a legal precedent and forced society to confront the deadly power words can hold in the digital age.
Case 7. Scarlett Jenkinson. In February 2023, in Warrington, Cheshire, two 15-year-olds, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, formed a disturbing bond that quickly escalated into something far more sinister. The two met at school and bonded over shared dark interests, leading them into an unhealthy obsession with violence and death. Before long, their friendship evolved from casual talks about murder to detailed planning. Their intended victim was Brianna Gay, a 16-year-old transgender girl from Birdwood. Brianna, who was known on TikTok for her beauty tips and glimpses of her life, was also a high school student dealing with bullying. She considered Scarlett and Eddie to be friends and trusted them enough to meet them on a cold afternoon in February at Victoria Park, unaware of the horrific fate awaiting her. Unlike most teens, Scarlett was deeply immersed in dark corners of the internet, watching serial killer documentaries, violent videos, and participating in forums that glorified murder. She kept a list of potential victims, detailing methods and fantasies. Eddie, quieter but equally disturbed, was drawn into Scarlett's violent ideas. He wasn't just following her, he actively participated in the planning. Together, they discussed murder methods, the best weapons, secluded locations, and ways to lure a victim. On February 11th, 2023, they lured Brianna to Victoria Park. CCTV footage captured the three of them entering the park, with Brianna appearing calm and smiling.
The knife, which was concealed, came out once they were deep in the woods, away from any potential witnesses. There, Scarlett and Eddie launched their attack. Brianna was stabbed 28 times in her head, neck, chest, and back in a brutal, calculated assault. Once she collapsed, they left her in the mud and walked away. Later that day, dog walkers discovered Brianna's body and alerted the police. Detectives quickly connected Scarlett and Eddie to the crime, with phone records revealing disturbing messages between the two discussing their plans. Scarlett's room contained chilling notes and drawings, including a kill list with Brianna's name. Both teens were arrested shortly after. At their 2023 trial in Manchester Crown Court, prosecutors presented evidence including explicit messages, drawings, and statements from Scarlett, who expressed a desire to become infamous as a killer. Eddie, claiming he only went along with the plan out of fear of Scarlett, tried to portray himself as a victim of manipulation. However, the jury convicted both of murder in January 2024. In February 2024, Judge Amanda Yip sentenced them to life imprisonment. Scarlett received a minimum of 22 years before parole could be considered, while Eddie was given 20 years. The judge described their crime as premeditated, callous, and senseless. Experts noted Scarlett's manipulative and intelligent nature with a chilling obsession with serial killers, while Eddie, though more passive, was still capable of violence when influenced by Scarlett. By 2025, Scarlett, now 17, was held in a secure youth detention center under psychological monitoring, while Eddie was incarcerated in a separate facility. Both will spend the majority of their lives in prison before being considered for release. Case 8. Skylar Richardson, an 18-year-old high school senior from Carlisle, Ohio, had planned a summer filled with prom, college plans, and cheerleading camps. However, everything changed one morning in July 2017 when police discovered a devastating secret. In the backyard of her home, they found a newborn baby girl buried in a shallow grave. The baby's body was wrapped in a towel. To the outside world, Skylar appeared to be the quintessential all-American teen. Blonde, petite, and an honor student, known for being polite and well-liked. But beneath this image, Skylar was hiding a secret that no one, not even her closest friends, knew. In April 2017, during a routine appointment with her gynecologist, Skylar found out she was pregnant. At 32 weeks, she was deep into her third trimester. Skylar was devastated and begged the doctor to keep it confidential, fearing the reaction from her conservative family. She left the appointment without telling anyone, including her parents or boyfriend. On May 7, just a few days after attending her senior prom, Skylar gave birth to the baby alone in her bathroom. She later claimed that the baby was stillborn, not moving or crying. Shocked and panicked, Skylar buried the baby behind her home with a garden spade, without seeking medical help or calling emergency services. The truth remained concealed until 2 months later when Skylar returned to her doctor for a follow-up. There, she disclosed part of the story, prompting the doctor to report the matter to the authorities. During questioning, Skylar initially maintained that the baby was stillborn. However, after hours of intense interrogation, she changed her statement, mentioning that she had attempted to cremate the baby. This revelation caused a media uproar. The prosecution accused her of intentionally killing her baby to maintain her perfect life.
while the defense argued that she was a scared, isolated teenager who panicked after giving birth alone. The trial, which began in September 2019, became a complex moral dilemma. The prosecution portrayed Skylar as a cold, image-obsessed teenager willing to kill her child to protect her outward appearance. The defense, on the other hand, presented her as a distressed teen suffering from an eating disorder without any support who made a tragic and panicked decision. The prosecution used photos of Skylar smiling at prom as evidence, claiming that they proved her motive to preserve her perfect image. The defense contended that the photos were misleading and didn't reflect the emotional state she was in. Forensic evidence also played a crucial role in the trial. A coroner initially suggested that the baby's bones showed signs of burning, which fueled the prosecution's argument of intentional harm. However, during the trial, the same coroner admitted that the evidence wasn't conclusive, and there was no proof the baby had been born alive. This uncertainty became a key factor in the jury's decision. In the end, Skylar was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment. She was convicted only of abuse of a corpse for burying the baby without informing authorities. The court sentenced her to 3 years of probation. The case sparked widespread debates about mental health, teen pregnancy, and the pressures of maintaining an ideal image. Some saw Skylar as a victim of trauma, a young girl overwhelmed by mental health issues, while others viewed her as manipulative and unreceptive. Many could not forgive the fact that she hid her pregnancy, gave birth alone, and never sought help either before or after the birth. Skylar completed her probation in 2022 and has since kept a low profile. She has expressed an interest in pursuing a career in law and helping others with mental health struggles. In rare interviews, Skylar has maintained that she did not intentionally harm her baby and that she suffers every day from what happened. This case brought national attention to issues such as teen pregnancy, stigma, the effects of isolation, and the complexities of legal proceedings involving minors. The key question remains: was Skylar a remorseless killer, or was she a terrified girl who made an irreparable mistake in silence?
Case 9, Jasmiyah Tasmiyah Whitehead. Jasmiyah Tasmiyah Whitehead were twin sisters who, at first glance, seemed to have a typical family dynamic. However, behind the walls of their home, chaos and tension simmered. Their mother, Nikki Whitehead, had been a teenage mother, giving birth to the twins at just 18 years old. For a large part of their early childhood, the twins were raised by their great-grandmother, Della Frazier. When the girls reached their teenage years, Nikki fought to regain custody, which she successfully obtained in 2007, with the court granting joint custody between her and Della. But reuniting with their mother wasn't easy for the twins. They viewed Nikki as a stranger, not a mother, and resented her attempts to impose rules. Nikki, on the other hand, struggled with controlling the twins, who yearned for more freedom. This led to numerous violent confrontations, so severe that the police were called to their home multiple times. On one occasion, Tasmiyah hit Nikki in the face with a pot, and during another argument, Jasmiyah punched a hole in the wall. The twins even found themselves in juvenile court and were placed in a diversion program. Court records showed that Nikki feared for her life, and others had witnessed the mounting tension.
On January 13, 2010, the situation finally erupted. The twins had missed their bus and gotten into another heated argument with Nikki. What started as a shouting match quickly escalated into shoving, then punching, and ultimately became a full-blown assault. The girls later admitted that the fight felt like it lasted forever. They used whatever they could find, a vase, a pot, and even a knife during the attack. Nikki fought back desperately, biting and scratching, but she was overpowered. The twins brutally beat her, stabbed her, and dragged her body into the bathtub. The house was soaked with blood. Nikki died from multiple stab wounds to her neck and chest, with deep cuts indicating rage and close contact. After the murder, the twins cleaned up, hid their bloody clothes, and went to school. Later, they returned home, staged the scene, and pretended to discover their mother's body. From the start, the police were suspicious. There was no forced entry, nothing was stolen, and the scene appeared to have been staged. Still, the twins maintained their story for over a year. They were placed with relatives after the murder, and life continued as normal until May 2010, when DNA evidence linked the twins to the crime scene. Blood spatter was found on their shoes, and Nikki's blood was found under their fingernails. Cuts on their bodies matched the weapons used in the attack. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the twins confessed to the murder, describing in chilling detail the 40-minute fight that ultimately led to their mother's death. They explained that the assault wasn't quick, it was overkill. One detective later commented that they didn't just kill her, they slaughtered her. In 2014, both sisters pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and were sentenced to 30 years in prison each. By taking the plea deal, they avoided a murder trial and the possibility of life sentences. At just 16 years old, the twins were sentenced to spend the rest of their youth in prison. They are currently serving their time in separate Georgia prisons, with eligibility for parole in the 2030s. The Whitehead twins have occasionally participated in prison interviews, expressing regret and confusion about how their relationship with their mother spiraled out of control. One of them stated in a recorded message, "It wasn't supposed to go like that." The case of Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead serves as a stark reminder of the deep-seated issues in family dynamics, unaddressed trauma, and the dangerous potential of teenage rage. It has prompted difficult questions about how much pressure teenagers can bear before reaching a breaking point, whether violence can be predicted when warning signs are ignored, and most disturbingly, whether two children could truly murder the person who gave them life.